the High Point City Council for our manager's briefing. Here with me in the room, we have every member of council present, except for Councilmember Tyrone Johnson. We have two items on our agenda for today. The first is a capital financing update, and with that, I'll recognize Bobby Fishjohn, our Director of Financing and Chief Financial Officer for the city.
That's twice now, Chief Financial Officer.
I heard that.
Adam
I heard
Andrews.
that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Bobby, it's on my agenda. I don't know who did it.
Okay, so Sandra, thank you.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. We invited our outside financial advisor to come in and present to you all new council, especially new council members, but also a refresher for those that have been around for a little bit, about our capital financing strategy and allow you all to have some interaction with them and ask them any questions you might have. So I want to introduce Ted Cole from Davenport. So to progress, yep, and then Ryan said talk towards them, not over here.
Okay.
All right, I've listened to him.
Good afternoon. I'm Ted Cole with Davenport. Happy to be here. We serve as financial advisor to the city, and we have for a number of years, primarily related to capital planning, helping with debt issuances, financial policies, things like that. So this afternoon, there's material on the screen. Some of you may have it in front of you if you want to follow along. There are page numbers in the bottom right corner. I'd like to keep it conversational, so please stop me if you have any questions. And we're going to cover two primary topics. The first is going to be what I'll call the tax-supported capital plan. So that is basically everything except public utilities, right? So it's parks and rec and public safety and things like that, tax-supported projects and debt. And then we have a section on utilities, primarily water and sewer, to talk about that. So starting with tax supported, I'm going to start with your bond ratings, the city's bond ratings. And if you look at the left-hand side, there's three national rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. You can see in the highlight on the left, you're a AA1, AAA, AA+ from those three rating agencies respectively. The highest rating that any local government or state can achieve is AAA. So you're either at the highest rating or one notch away from the highest rating from all three rating agencies. And in the bottom left, you can see the progression over time where we started back in 2000 and where you've had some upgrades to that bond rating over the years. And I'll talk a little bit about what goes into that bond rating in a moment. On the right-hand side, we're introducing some peer comparatives that we pull from a Moody's database, and the top right is looking at cities and towns nationally, so across the country, that are either rated AAA, AA1, AA2, AA3, or single A, and the green highlights are the ones we're going to look at. Essentially, AAA, AA1, and AA2. Those are the three we're going to look at. And then below that, a little more meaningful perhaps, is similarly rated North Carolina cities and towns. We're excluding counties, so we're talking about cities and towns. And you can see there are 16 that are rated AAA, 13 that are rated AA1, one of which is you all, and 10 that are rated AA2. And you can see who those are in the very bottom right. So kind of talking about your peers, if you will, from a rating perspective. Right? A little bit about the methodology of ratings, and I'll focus mostly on the Moody's. It's a little bit simpler. They are very data-driven, quantitative. They start with inputs using audits, budgets, and census data. For them, economy is worth 30% of the rating. So they're talking about things like your tax base per capita, wealth levels, and economic output for the city and the region. That's worth 30% of the rating, and the checkbox there, those are really concepts that you all don't have direct control over, budget to budget. Those are longer term initiatives, right, to grow the tax base or create higher paying jobs. So it's really, that's more of a longer term control issue for the elected body. Secondly is financial performance. That's 30% of the rating. So what are we talking about there? How you budget, how you perform relative to budget, your reserve levels, things like that. And that is something that you have some short-term control over as you're putting budgets together and thinking about making financial decisions. You can control that to some extent. Thirdly is institutional framework. That's worth 10% of the rating. You get a very good score there because you're a North Carolina city, and the rating agencies consider North Carolina to be a good government state relative to how cities have to function in other states. So you're well positioned there by virtue of where you are. And then lastly, leverage. That is actual debt, but it's also things like your pension obligations for retirees, post-employment benefits for retirees. That's worth 30% of the rating, and also one where you've got some shorter term control, i.e. do you issue debt for a project or not? You can manage that to some extent. So we've really got about 60% of the rating between finance and debt, where you've got some control over how those evolve over time, with the other roughly 40% longer term control, or a little less able to be managed year to year, budget to budget. S&P at the bottom gets to about the same place, a few more moving parts, but largely the same approach. Okay, any questions on that?
So that explains the correlation between, Councilman Andrew, by the way, the correlation between the city size and our rating, because the quick views show that the larger cities tend to have a higher rating.
Tax base is definitely helps you get to those higher rating levels. The higher you get, making that move from AA1 or AA plus to AAA is one of the harder ones. And for you all, particularly from Moody's, they can prescribe what they see is what needs to happen to see an upgrade in the rating. And for Moody's with you all, it's continued expansion of the tax base, i.e. a larger and more diversified tax base, improved wealth levels, so whether that's measured on median family income or median household income, that's census-related data, and being able to maintain the strong reserves that you have. Your reserves are very strong. They would like to see, to get to AAA, tax base expansion, improvement in wealth levels, and the maintaining of your existing reserve levels, not allowing those to in any way weaken. So some of the things you would need to demonstrate are happening to get to that AAA are going to be longer term initiatives.
Well, what are the implications between being A1 and AAA for
Sure.
putting under the bond?
So if you were going into the bond market today with a general obligation bond, and normally we would see those over a 20-year term, fixed rate, tax exempt because you're a local government, and let's say that today your rate would be a 350. If you were AAA, maybe it's a 340 or a 335. So it is not insignificant, but it's not a major difference in your cost of capital. That's largely how it would manifest itself. Obviously, it's nice to be AAA as opposed to AA1 for various reasons, but practically speaking, it would improve your borrowing rate in that 10 to 15 basis point range, which is helpful, but not an absolute game changer.
So essentially, it's your credit score versus interest rates.
That's right. Okay? All right, so talk about existing debt. Remember, this is just tax-supported debt. Big picture, there's about $114 million of debt outstanding. It's been issued over the years for various purposes, and it's in various stages of getting paid down. And you can see graphically by fiscal year, starting with the year we're in, the payments are up around $14 million a year, and you see they're stepping down over time. And you can see here, principal, interest, and total payments. Everything is fixed. We know these to the penny. They'll only be changed if you refund it or pay it down early. You can see you're paying off $9 to $10 million a year of principal, so things are retiring pretty rapidly, which is what this far right column is telling us. It's called the 10-year payout. It's a forward-looking measure, measured in percentages. And what it's saying is 10 years from now, if you make these payments, how much of the $114 million will be paid back? It's about 70% will have been repaid. Higher is better. It means you're paying your debt back more quickly. You're not backloading it. So you've got what I would call a pretty typical looking North Carolina debt profile. It's fixed rate. It's generally declining every year. Some years the declines are more than others. And that is going to help us as we move into a discussion about what's in front of you, what additional projects that might need debt might come before you. As this debt is coming down and you're folding in new debt, it's going to help you on the cash flows and affordability.
So how much debt is too much debt?
So if we look here, this gets to somewhat of that answering that question. You have three policies. One is that 10-year payout ratio. We don't want that to drop below 60%. You're above it, and in that case, higher is better. So you're above your policy there. And you can see, compared to those national cities or the North Carolina cities, High Point's in gold, you stack up pretty well. I mean, the further out to the right on this one, your gold bar, the better. But you're very much in line with your peers, and you're certainly in compliance with your policy. Secondly is debt to assessed value. So here we're measuring the debt outstanding as a percent of your tax base. Lower is better. The policy you all have says we don't want to go above 2.5%. You're well below that. So one, you're in compliance. Two, on a comparison basis, you want your bar shorter on this one, further to the left. You compare very well. You can see there are AAA North Carolina cities that have debt to assessed value that are out around 1.5%, but they're still AAA. And remember that matrix, the rating is not all about debt. Debt's about 30% of it, but a high growth community, growing tax base, diversified tax base with output and stronger wealth levels typically require more capital needs. In order to keep up with those, they're often issuing debt, so it's not uncommon to see highly rated communities, because they are growing, having higher levels of debt. So it's hard to say exactly how much is enough or too much. Obviously, we want to make sure you're taking care of the needs that you all have prioritized. You're certainly well within your policy, and you line up well here, and you do have room to take on some additional debt. Nothing that we're going to show you today, in my mind, would jeopardize your ability to improve your rating. Again, I think what's driving the rating more than anything is to see a continued expansion of the tax base and some demographics. But it's kind of a hard question to answer, because you could be a little bit weaker on your debt metrics, but stronger in some of those other things and still have a very strong rating. Lastly, debt service to expenditure. So how much of your annual budget is going towards debt service? Your policy says we don't want to go above 15. You're under 10%, so you're in compliance. You have some room to take on. All three of these policies tell us that High Point has debt capacity. You can take on debt and still demonstrate you're in compliance with your policies, not unlimited, but some amount of significant debt. You're in compliance with your policies, and you maintain a debt profile we would expect for a AA rated and even AAA rated city. The capacity is there. The question is it affordable, right? The affordability is not always as simple as the capacity, and that's what we want to talk about on this next slide. Page 7, I think, is the last of the general fund slides. And our point in this is to demonstrate what we believe is coming in the next few years, all right, in terms of tax-supported debt. So as you look at the left-hand side, voted general obligation bonds that have been voted, you have the authorization, you're waiting to issue that debt. You've got 24 million authorized, 12 for transportation, 12 for parks and rec. Our work with staff has us assuming that we're going to be ready to issue that debt in the spring of 26, so call it in 2 years, okay? In the meantime, within North Carolina, you have something called 2/3 bonds. As you're paying down your debt, you can issue some new debt without a voter referendum for certain purposes. We're in the midst of doing one right now at about 5.4 million. That's happening as we speak. I think there might be something on your agenda this evening for that. And then there's another opportunity to do one of those in the spring of 2026. So the GOs, you've got the voted at 24 million and these 2/3 of just under 11 million. Away from the voted debt, we have these non-voted limited obligation bonds, or LOBs. And we've got a series of projects that have been identified that might be funded with that type of debt. Stadium improvements at $6 million, 300 Oak Street at $5 million, New City Hall at $60 million, downtown parking at $14 million. All in, those 4 projects, about $85 million, unfolding between the spring of '25 and the spring of '27. Obviously no commitments have been made to that. None of this debt on this entire page, none of that will be issued without the city council approval and going through a process. So this is all part of the plan. But all in, we've got, let's call it round up, $120 million coming ahead over the next, call it 3 years, okay, of tax-supported debt. We've modeled that debt. We have a very detailed debt model that we've had in place for a number of years, and we review it regularly with staff. We model the debt in a way that the local government commission in Raleigh, who also has to approve your debt, would be comfortable and approve. It's 20-year debt. We're using a 5% interest rate. Today, you'd be at 3.5%, so we got a little bit of cushion. Tried to be conservative. On the right-hand side, if we were to do all of this exactly like we've laid out, we've gone back and we've looked at our debt policies and said, okay, can we demonstrate comfortably that we could continue to be in compliance with our debt policies if we do this? And the answer is yes, with the exception of maybe 1 year on that payout ratio where you dip from 60 down to 59 point something percent. It's not an issue from where we sit, and it may sort itself out completely when this plan actually comes together. So what I would tell you is this entire program can be accommodated within your existing policies, no need to revisit those, and we can demonstrate and comfortably say that we'll be in compliance. The last piece of this in the bottom right is affordability. You all have several sources of funding that you dedicate every year to debt service. And you can go back to the budget and look at it. It's tracked. We update our model every year to see how we performed relative to what the budgeted items were. And we've generally outperformed there. These GO bonds, the 24 and the 10, those can be taken on, as we've shown, without any new additional revenue coming into our model. Those are essentially, if you will, paid for within the model, within the assumptions that we've been making for a number of years. When we start talking about this incremental additional 85 million, that's where we have some shortfalls. So what we've measured here is in the totality for the entire 120 million, and we've equated it to pennies on the tax rate for you. I think right now a penny is generating about $1,360,000-ish, 1,360,000 per penny. What we've identified is if you do this entire program, what additional level of funding do you need to bring into that debt model? In 26, it would be about a penny. And in 27, when most of this comes online, it would be about 5.5 pennies. So you could choose to fund this. Doesn't have to be pennies, but we've equated it to pennies so you have a frame of reference. About a little less than 6.5 pennies worth of revenue is needed starting in 2026, really needed in 27 and beyond. Okay?
How many years past that, though?
There is a point at which you could start to drop that. And or you would start to be able to afford the next series of projects.
But this is basically, I mean, if we did all these things, it's basically doubling the debt, because it's 114 million now. I know it's being paid down, but right, isn't that basically doubling it?
Yeah, it's, we're basically bringing on what you have outstanding right now in the next 3 years. Granted, we'll have paid back 30, 40 million, but you're close to doubling it. Okay?
Is that very common, to double one's debt?
It's not uncommon, different people, different localities are in different stages of taking on debt, and some of it comes in chunks and others it's spread out. So I wouldn't say there is nothing in here that would give us any pause in talking to the local government commission or the rating agencies. Very solid projects that have been identified. So I'm not sure it's normal or abnormal necessarily, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's a real outlier in any real way. So So again, on the affordability, most of this is being driven by these incremental projects. If they did not exist, hypothetically, the model funds these. Another way to look at the same affordability, this was saying we need a penny here and 5.5 pennies here. Another potential way of looking at it would be, well, what if we just did it all at once, right? We really like this plan, we want to do it, we'd like to fund this program and move on. You would need the equivalent of about 3.5 pennies in the budget you're working on. So it's a little less, but you're getting it earlier. It's just another way to potentially fund the same program. Do it as you need it, and it's somewhere a little over 6 pennies, or do it in 25 or 26 as a one-time adjustment, and you're able to buy it down a little bit. Just as a point of reference, last year when we did this, I think across the board, we were a penny higher than these outcomes. So the revenues that are in the model, the conservative nature of how we've modeled it, have outperformed a little bit, plus a couple of projects have been pushed out. So we're a little better than where we were a year ago when we talk about the impact, but there is likely to be some additional revenue necessary to be pulled into the model if we're going to do all of this as shown.
For the record, what are those 2 projects that got pushed out?
So the transportation bonds, the 12 million, were estimated to be issued in spring of '24. That project is still under design, currently the Triangle Lake project. And then I believe the City Hall project was pushed back a year to match the lease that we're entered into with the church, to make sure we were in line with that. And maybe parking was also pushed another year. But so there was a slight adjustment to the projects, which pushed that maximum debt service payment out another year.
Okay. Last item on this, and this will ring true to some of you that have been on council for a while. If not, maybe it's new. Under the Department of State Treasurer and Local Government Commission, I'm sure you're familiar with that. They've got a fiscal management side that looks at audits and budgets and finance and operating mode, and then they've got a debt management side. And essentially, any of the debt we're talking about, we've got to work through the Local Government Commission to get that debt issued. I don't ever anticipate any problem, but a couple of things that, they've got to get comfortable with before they approve debt, that you've got your bids and permits in hand, that the debt is being amortized in a way that's consistent with what they would want to see. You've got good debt practices, you're current on your audits and all of that. So no issues there for the city of High Point. Historically, you've never had any issues getting their approval for debt. Okay? All right, so now we're going to talk about utility. And again, this is water and sewer. It's a different credit, right? So the one we were just talking about is backed by your full faith and credit, meaning your taxing authority as a city council. You can raise taxes if you need to pay back general obligation debt. In fact, you're required by law to do that. If you can't make a payment on a GO bond, you have to raise taxes to create revenue. With water and sewer, back in 2004, when the capital needs were really ramping up in the water and sewer system, the city established a revenue bond credit. And what that is, when you sell bonds for revenue bond, when you sell revenue bonds, the investors are getting a pledge of the revenues of the system. So the way it works is you bring in revenues from your customers. The first thing you have to pay are your operating expenses, salaries, utilities, chemicals, what have you. That gets paid. And then the very next thing after those is you pay your debt. And so that's what the lien is for a revenue bond. There's not any backing of the taxing authority. There's no lien on an asset or a building, no mortgage. It's the revenues generated by the system. So right now you're rated AA2, AAA, AA+. So you've kind of got the spectrum here across the 3 top rated or top rating categories. And you can see back when we started this revenue bond in 2004, we were single A and just into the AA, and we've had some rating upgrades over the years because we've established a track record, there's good rate management, there's good policies and procedures, there's financial performance, and the rating agencies have recognized over the years that we've continued to evolve to a stronger revenue bond issuer. The way the city is involved is helpful, right? I mean, the service area that the water and sewer system serves is the city. So the stronger that service area, the stronger that part of the revenue bond analysis becomes. And you are talking a more significant differential in your borrowing rate when you go from a single A to a double A. The approach to rating utilities got a few more moving parts to it, but you can see the system characteristics is worth about 30% of the rating. Remaining useful life of your assets. Are you keeping things up to date and current and in good repair? The service area, that is the city in this case, wealth levels, median family income, and the size of the system. Those are all generally longer term control issues that you don't manage any one of those in a real direct way in the short term. Financial strength is 40%, something called annual debt service coverage. I'm going to tell you about that, as well as your reserve levels. So just like in the general fund, you need reserves. You need reserves in a water and sewer system. Management, 20%, so it's how you're managing your rates and charges, your regulatory compliance, and your capital planning. And then finally, your legal provisions. The bonds that you sell, how are they written? Are they written strongly from an investor's perspective, or are they written more loosely? What I want to cover first is this annual debt service coverage. Essentially, what we need to be able to demonstrate in our bond documents, is that for every dollar of debt service you have to pay, you need to show that you have at least $1.20 available to pay it. And so that creates a coverage of 1.2 times. That's the absolute minimum that you can have to pay $1, $1, you have $1.20. Now you have, and we want to continue to operate at a higher level than that. That's the very bare minimum that's provided for in the documents.
Well, back up right there, when you say bare minimum provided in documents, that's city policy or that's policy for the LGC?
That is tied to your revenue bond documents that were put in place in 2004. And it's
It's a city policy.
It's a city policy, but now that you've issued that debt, you have outside investors that are a party to that. You can't just change it because something occurs. You've got to live by that. There was a trust agreement put in place in 2004, and that's a very standard number, by the way, as a minimum. And it's got a few other tweaks to it where you can actually use some of your cash to meet the test if you have to. It also gets very specific about how you issue additional revenue bonds, right? Because remember, what the investor has is a lien on your revenues. If you don't have revenues that are growing, either from a system growth or rates and charges, you shouldn't be issuing new debt. And so the ability to issue additional bonds is tied to your financial projections of meeting that debt coverage level or above. This was the next slide. All three rating agencies, we've tried to highlight for you what their takeaways were. So for Moody's, factors that could lead to a downgrade, and keep in mind, that's not on the table here. I just want to emphasize what they see as the potential risks is the failure to implement timely rate increases, right? So obviously we're going into budget FY25. We have a long-term plan that we've talked about that has generally been rate increases in the 3 to 5% per year. I think the last time we presented this, we were talking about 4% per year. And I think going into budget, that I think the staff's going to be revisiting that and coming back to you all with a recommendation, and that may be a higher level of rate increase. That conversation is going to be evolving, and we'll talk about that. But wherever you land, that is an important part for all of these rating agencies, is to continue to manage those rates and charges in an adequate way, strong levels of reserves, meeting targeted coverage levels, rate adjustments that are inadequate to support the CIP and or increased carrying costs. So it's a very important theme that flows through here. The debt profile is kind of interesting. What's outstanding right now is $170 million of water and sewer bonds. Most of them are revenue bonds. You got a little bit of GOs and some installments and revolving. But you can go back and see annually what your debt service has done from 98. It was about $4 million a year. It's stepped up. We hit a peak of around $18 million a year. We've kind of come down, and we're sitting now roughly $15.5 million a year of annual payments on the water and sewer debt. So call it $15.5 million. You're paying back $9 to $10 million a year. You see, there's going to be a big drop here in 2033, another pretty significant drop in 35. So these drops are going to be helpful at some point, but you know, the next roughly decade is your payments are relatively flat. So any new debt that we do is going to increase these payments. And so that's where we've got to be prepared with managing rates and charges and being able to demonstrate that coverage. But a very, again, pretty typical debt profile for a North Carolina utility.
Ted,
Yes.
can I ask a quick question? So looking at what you said there about revenues having to equal 120% of the debt you issue and or owe.
Right?
There could be previous iterations of council where basically set plans for capital projects for water and sewer. And as a council here, we're beholden to try to honor that 120% in terms of revenue, right?
Correct.
So in many cases, when we have discussions about raising water and sewer rates, it's not necessarily, are we trying to raise water and sewer rates being ignorant of the pressure it places on our residents, but we're beholden in many ways. Like you said, we put in our document, folks bought the debt and lend it as a result of what's there, so we're beholden to honoring that.
That's right. You've got a contract of sorts that you've got to maintain compliance with, and in some cases, that's going to require to raise revenues beyond what the natural growth of the system might do, so rate increases.
Yeah.
Maybe you can find some savings operationally, but here in the current environment, that's really, really tough. Operationally, we've seen costs going up higher than the projections were, and capital costs are, you know, everything is a little more expensive. So it's putting more pressure on the system. But to your point, yes, there are things that were put in place years ago with the revenue bond documents that it's really, the rate management is not discretionary. There's an element of it that's just required to maintain compliance.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of that, so thank you for that. I think oftentimes we have discussions about things, and we're deliberating, thinking pros and cons of decisions, and sometimes it feels like you make a decision, you squeeze on this side of the balloon and it expands on the other side.
Right.
If we say no to trying to honor certain commitments that we've made to lenders, it seriously impacts the ratings that we have, and those observations are noted. It impacts capital projects. And these are capital projects that our residents need to ensure we still have healthy water and sewers that doesn't get stuck and make neighborhoods stink, right? And I'm sorry to get kind of raw there, I just want to make sure everyone's aware. So I appreciate that point. I also appreciate the other point that you just elevated, which is that it's not just about about raising rates. If you are able to increase customers to your system, which so often our economic development folks are recruiting more companies into the city. And one of the things we often know in our economic development projects is we always know, are they a water and sewer customer? Because if they're being added into our system, then that supports what we need to hit our 120% without having to raise rates. Same for our taxes and so many other things. So economic development plays a role of not just, again, creating jobs adding to our tax base, but it relieves pressure on existing residents when we bring more customers to the system.
That's right, because you have capacity in your system for those additional users, and that's spreading a number of fixed costs across a larger customer base.
And how does the selling of excess load affect all of this?
So that was related to the electric utility, and they do not currently have any debt. So this
So-
is purely water and sewer.
Is there any way to apply, like, where does that go if we don't have debt?
It's contained in the electric utility fund. Each of these enterprises are run similar to a business where the rates go to pay for the cost of those operations.
So does that go down when we sell off?
if you don't mind, just because I want to stay on water.
I'm just
sewer
asking, because
over
like,
here.
if these rates are in the same bill for people, I'm just trying to understand, like, if we're able to lower one, then it helps offset the raising of the other.
Yeah,
Because
no,
it sounds like that's what's kind of we're being led to here.
I can't speak to that, but that's an absolute possibility, that if you were to lower electric rates and raise water rates, you could end up, if you had a water and sewer and electric customer, seeing, negligible impact on the bill. We've run those comparisons before when we did have an electric rate increase, and you're able to demonstrate that in some cases.
Okay?
One thing that I would like to add to that, this is Tasha Logan speaking, is that we do have some customers that are residents of High Point that might not necessarily be an electric utility customer. So we might be able to run an example that shows what the impact would be for adjusting all those different rates. I think we have to just keep in mind that we may have a water and sewer customer that's not an electric customer, because we do have some that are served by a different utility.
I'm just going to hit quickly on 15. This is just a snapshot of a financial model that is maintained with the city, a rate consultant. We use it. This happens to date back to 2022. And at the time, 2024 through 27 were the projected period, right? And we were assuming 4% per year rate increases. I think what's coming in the ongoing budget discussions is a revisit of that. It may be at a slightly higher number. We had a couple of debt issuances for revenue bonds. Those have been slid out a year each. That's somewhat helpful to the cash flow, a little bit later for that debt coming online. We're tracking revenues, which have been tracking well. Expenditure projections, actual expenditures have outpaced, given what we've seen with inflation and the economy. So there's been a little bit of a challenge meeting this pro forma at the 4% rate increase with the growing expenditure numbers. And then finally, what we get down to, importantly, is it circles back to this debt coverage projection, right? And so your requirement is that you're at 120 times, and you can see over the years you've been, upwards of 1.7. We were projecting to be in that 1.7 times range, and it is above your absolute requirement, right? 120, but it is commensurate with what the market would expect from a AA, AAA rated utility, is operating at a higher level. Because if you think about it, what the investor has is a lien on revenues, and that cushion between the minimum of 120 and wherever you're operating higher is what will help absorb a unexpected reduction in revenues or increase in expenses, so that they are still insured to get their debt payments, and that you're still able to do, make those payments without any problem of a pending default or other cash flow event. So we want to continue.
The number's going down though, is that disconcerting?
It is, in this period of time, it is going down, and the model has the ability to go out several years and look at the multi-year. And so we look at that, and it's not unexpected that it might go down when you bring on a new piece of debt as you're working to get rates and charges back up. But if we're able to demonstrate we're in that 170 range, that is commensurate with what we've told the rating agencies, and again, what they would consider to be an acceptable level of coverage for a similarly rated community or revenue bond credit.
So we've given ourselves a cushion there with the 120 policy and a 4 that the investor's gonna look at. Their risk is higher if we go back closer to our policy.
Correct. And the rating agencies, as a proxy for the investor, will say, that's a riskier bond, maybe it's not a AA bond, maybe it's something else. So maintaining that coverage above that minimum is expected at the rating level where you all are. And it goes back to your point exactly, which is perceived risk. Okay? Little bit of history as we were issuing the debt, sort of some of the things that were going on that was promoting or necessitating the debt issuance. I think a lot of you probably know that Piedmont Triad Raw Water Authority was being created. Various and broad system improvements tied to consent orders, expansions, rehab, additional expansion and upgrade. So you can see over this period of time, from '02 to '22, you've issued almost $300 million worth of debt-funded projects, and you've funded many with cash as well. You've got a long history of managing rates. So you go back to 2001, the city was under consent orders, doing other things, a lot of pent-up demand for capital. We were, coming off of 14% per year rate increases, and we got into this mode of going to revenue bonds, doing a longer term look, and that's where we kind of fell into this 4 to 6% range of rate increases, and you really kind of stayed in that band nearly every year, taking a few years off of rate increases, 13 and 14. Some years you did 3%. Didn't do anything in 22, right? So certain things are tied to COVID and other things that are going on, and felt like maybe this was not a year to do it. But at least in the last 2 years, you've been solidly at that 4% per year through 24. And as the next several weeks and months go forward, you'll be talking more about 2025. But there is a very good history of having managed rates in a way to demonstrate that financial performance, okay? Where you sit now, and this is something that the North Carolina Environmental Finance Center maintains. Any of y'all can go online and look at it and plug in the info. This is a bill comparison. It's for a combined water and sewer bill for a customer that uses 5,000 gallons a month. The median of 338 different utilities that supplied their information. The median combined bill for 5,000 gallons monthly is $89.71, and you all are sitting at $89.23. So you're really right on the median, the midpoint. Half of those 338 systems are higher than you, and half are lower. And you got a minimum of 28 and a maximum of $250 a month. So it just gives you an idea of the dispersion across the entire state, and who it does depend on these systems supplying the information.
Ted, can you, sorry, and I don't know if you've got it broken down this way, but I'd be very curious to know that end that goes to your right, are what cities of what size typically go that way? And maybe it's not based on size, maybe it's based on household income instead, but I'd love to know. And if you can't
we
say right now,
can
also
follow up with Bobby and Eric. I don't know who that is, and it may be a very small system, but most of the larger, Greensboro, Raleigh, Charlotte, yourselves, Winston, I mean, they're working in a fairly similar range to this, but there are clearly outliers on both ends of the spectrum, but we can drill down and get some of that. And then we just have a few wrap-up bullet points. Most of these I think I've covered and are relatively straightforward. What I would say, I'm not going to read them to you, is on both sides of the picture, the tax-supported side and the utility side, I think you all have been very well managed. You have certainly issued debt. You've done it in, I think, a responsible way. You're not over-leveraged. The city absolutely has debt capacity. Having these conversations about, $100 million plus of general fund projects and probably over $200 million of utility projects is a very reasonable conversation. You are not at a point where debt is not an option by any means. So I think the key is just continued long-term planning, having the dialogue like you do every budget year about rates and charges to try to hit some of those key metrics, which allows you to keep the rating you have. That helps make debt more affordable. And we don't see any real problem with the path forward. And I do believe over time there's an opportunity to improve the rating. And some of that is just about getting bigger, to the extent that's important to you. None of this should be at a detriment to the rating. In fact, it's the longer term planning can actually help you get there a little bit sooner, because they get a lot of comfort out of localities that are looking long-term and not just doing one budget at a time in a vacuum. Any final questions?
Ted, can we go back to the slide where we're talking about our tax rate? I just want to make sure that we're clear when we're talking about those recommendations are specifically tied to when these projects are coming online, with those tax rates that are recommended there. If we're talking about what might be needed to support any increase in operational costs, that would be aside from what's
Correct,
recommended for these
yes.
capital projects that are listed here. I just want to make sure that we're drawing that distinction.
Yes, absolutely right. Anything we've shown here on the general fund side would be driven by debt and capital, not operating. On the utility side, the 4%, 5%, whatever it ends up being, is sort of, that's got operations and debt all rolled into it. It's just two different ways of the model, but you're absolutely right. Nothing related to operating would be addressed if you were to make these adjustments, just debt.
Yeah, and that's really helpful, Manager Ford, especially when we're talking about some of our look back at personnel and how we've got vacancies and what you all are doing in terms of the salary studies and whatnot. That's gonna be a key piece of that conversation.
And it also ties into, as we're bringing these projects online, there's typically an operating impact to those projects as well as we're making these enhancements that we have to factor into our budget.
Any questions from council, for staff, or for Ted from Davenport and Company?
So how does the replacement dam fit into this in terms of financing that rather large project?
Yeah, so that's built into our CIP on the revenue bond side of things. So it's factored into the assumptions that are in that 2-year-old study that he showed you on when we would project to issue bonds for that project as well as others. But it is a large project. It is about 75 to 80% of an entire debt issuance, right?
Right.
So it's going to be a big drain on the whole CIP for water and sewer.
Does that imply that we'll have to raise the rates more than 4% to cover that?
I wouldn't say that one specifically. I would, and I'd let Robbie Stone, if he were here, take that. But in general, projects are coming in higher than estimated. There are many demands on that revenue bond or that water sewer CIP, and so it's a matter of, can you push projects out any longer, or do they have to be built now? And then if they have to be built now, what's it going to take to pay for them? So yes, it could if we end up having to issue more debt to accomplish those projects.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one other point I failed to make, just about our general approach here. We've tried to be conservative at a few levels. With the interest rate we've assumed. Also, we've not made any assumptions about the sale of any property. I think that's part of the discussion with some of these projects. There could be some offsetting revenues from the sale of projects, even potentially parking revenue, none of, none of which we've accounted for. So there's a couple different places where maybe there's an opportunity to do a little better than what we've shown here.
There's also not reflecting any increases we see from county property valuations. So over the next few years, if we see those valuations where tax values go up on properties, there will be revenue that we'll get from that, and that'll give us some margin, hopefully.
Yeah.
That allows us to adjust.
Absolutely. I mean, the more your tax base grows, every penny is generating more dollars. Therefore, it would take fewer pennies to plug the same debt service payment.
Any other questions, council? Ted or staff?
Ted, thank you.
Ted, thank you so much. We
All right,
appreciate you
thank
coming
you.
in. Bobby, do you have anything else for the capital financing update? Okay. With that, it looks like we're good to transition to our next agenda item. And for those of you who are tired of talking numbers, we can, no, I'm kidding. Lee Tillery is here with us, who's the director of our Parks and Rec department, and I think Lee's got some team members here as well. And so we're excited because I know in terms of a lot of what we just spoke about here, obviously Parks and Rec has a number of projects that are underway and a lot of great things going on. So Lee, whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away.
I think I'm ready. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Good to see mayor, members of council. I'm happy to be here and talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is High Point Parks and Recreation. As the mayor said, my name is Lee Tillery. I've been the director here, been in the city for 11 years. I've been the director for 10 years. And this is Tracy Pegram. Tracy's the assistant director. She's been here 10 years as well. She came on a little bit after me. And I was thinking on the way in, I'm quickly moving up the seniority level of department heads as they retire. But anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about our department, give you guys an overview. I appreciate y'all taking the time to hear me out. I'm not sure where he's going with this. So it might be quicker than this.
Astro subtlety.
Okay, I'll start. So real quick, I want to talk to you a little bit about our department. I'll talk to you about how we're set up administratively, talk about some projects and plans that we have in place, and then talk a little bit about the future for where we're going for the department. First of all, I want to say in the 11 years that I've been here, I've been amazed of the support, not only from City Council, but our manager's office, our citizens here in High Point. I hear horror stories from my colleagues across the state. So I just want to say thank y'all. A lot of y'all have known for a long time, been on board. But as you're going to see, historically and traditionally, the city of High Point has always supported Parks and Recreation. It's got a great story behind it. So this talks a little bit about our mission and what we do. Obviously, we want to enhance the quality of life for our citizens here in High Point, and how we do that is our recreational services, our programs, our parks, and our facilities. And we want to take care of it now, but we also want to set the stage for the future as well. So a little bit about the City of High Point Parks and Recreation. You can believe it now when I say that, but we were one of the oldest Parks and Recreation departments in the state of North Carolina. So the original, I think the oldest department's in Durham, or maybe the county of Durham, and they were, when was that, in the early 1930s. Our first park, as far as much as history as we have, we think opened in 1926 as far as we can find it. It was called Colonial Park at the time. That's park today known as Triangle Park, which is still there. 1932, we opened Blair Park with Nine Hole Golf Course. So anytime you're playing golf at Blair Park, just know on the greens, the grass has been there for a long time. It should be really true to your putts if you're good and not like me. Both High Point City Lake Park and Washington Terrace were WPA projects. So that tells you a little bit about the history of the Depression-led efforts. President Roosevelt back in those times. We have some great history on both the parks as far as what was done during those years. It's pretty amazing. We have some pictures that we came across. I heard somebody talk about the dam earlier. The dam was built in the 20s, I think it was 25, something like that. And there's people, with these big ladders, and they're standing on each other's shoulders, and they're working and things like that. I can only imagine. That's how it was pretty amazing that they could build that at the time. So that talks a little bit about our history. It's pretty neat. We did a lot of history, and I'll talk about it when we talk about City Lake Park, with the history of that park. And again, it goes back to really High Point's dedication to Parks and Recreation. It's pretty neat. We'll talk a little bit about the golf courses. For those of you who don't know, the Ocala Golf Course, it opened in 1972. We contracted with Pete Dye, who is a famous golf architect. If you watch the Players Championship this weekend, that's the same golf course he designed, the same golf course architect and designer who designed that course, designed Ocala Golf Course. So it's pretty neat to have that designation here in High Point. Real quick, and I won't read through all of this, but I want to make a point to say how fortunate we are to have what we have in High Point Parks and Recreation. You see, we have 41 parks, we have golf courses, talks about the recreation centers, our marinas, everything else here. We're pretty familiar with other departments in North Carolina. And a city, how many people do we have? 118, 120,000 people? You just don't see this in a lot of departments across the state. You don't see some of the amenities that we have. So we're very fortunate to have this. So if you always just live in High Point and say, well, this is what Parks and Recreation is, it's not. You go to other areas, they simply don't have that. They don't have these amenities. So we're very fortunate to have what we have, the diversity of parks, programs, facilities. It's something to be very proud of. I didn't know it. That's what brought me to High Point. I came here and said, I wonder what High Point has. And I was amazed. I went home and told my girlfriend, soon to be wife, actually, I was like, do you know all that they have in High Point? And I went and explained it to her, and she said she never knew that either. So to understand how fortunate we are to have what we have with all these parks and these great facilities, our greenways, is truly amazing, really, in North Carolina. I'm not familiar really in other states, but here in this state to have this, we're very, very fortunate. Department staff, we have 123 full-time. We have 16 what we call PB employees, 63 part-time, and we employ 92 seasonal employees. So it's a lot to keep up with. I will say we have a passionate group of employees. Parks and Recreation is important to me. And it's our job and our profession, but we get to see good every day. We're pretty fortunate people, and the people on our staff share that same passion for Parks and Recreation. Our 92 seasonal, the city's done just a great job over the last 2 or 3 years of raising those minimum wages of our part-time employees. That has been crucial, especially with the evolution of City Lake Park and what we needed, how we're competing against other departments and other people just for lifeguards. It's been very important to be able to, with those increased rates in our part-time salary, to have those in place. It's been great. So we employ 92 seasonal. We're working on those right now and bringing them on. We're one of the only, I think we might be the last municipality in North Carolina to have sworn park rangers. So we have 5 sworn law officers. The chief reports to me. And those guys do everything Parks and Recreation, special events, parking, calls, money drops. Those guys are great. They're invaluable to have, so they're good. Now, there are only 5 of them, so they can't be everywhere at once, and we certainly depend on the High Point Police Department, and they do a great job of working with us as well. Parks and Recreation Commission, there's who we have on there now. We're lucky to have Vicki on. Vicki was on that as a non-council member. Now you're on it as a council member, so we're lucky to have Vicki on there as our representative and her history and background with Parks and Recreation. I think we had 2 openings now on the Parks Commission, and one was in the area of your ward, Vicki. On the left is Marshall Newsom. Marshall received an award from the state. I think I'm wearing that same suit, so you don't pay attention to that. Marshall received an award from the state. That's 2 years ago? 2 years ago. And he was recognized for his involvement. He's been a long time chair of the Parks and Recreation Commission. It's called the Chip Rayburn Award, and so that's awarded to volunteers across the state of North Carolina, especially with Parks and Recreation Commissions. And Marshall won that award. He's been a great supporter of our department. We have some great people on that commission. Appreciate y'all's support of them as well. This is a big one here. We're a nationally accredited agency through the Commission of Accreditation of Parks and Recreation Agencies. These are standards, best standards that they set in place for departments if they wanted to be an accredited agency. And I'm proud to say we met every one of those 154 standards when we went through the process. So we're real proud of that. You can see some of the numbers on that. Less than 2% of all parks and recreation agencies across the country have this designation. North Carolina is actually pretty strong with having 14, so we're very proud of that. Again, you get accredited, and then it's a 5-year reaccreditation process. So we go in 2 years, 2026, we go back for reaccreditation. That's really about the size of the award they gave us, and that was so disappointing. I mean, you can barely see it on our desk when we go in, when we get accredited. We're going to ask for a bigger award next time. We have 4 divisions within our department, and I'll roll through those pretty quickly so you can see how we're set up administratively and operationally. Through our administration department, we have representatives that work in areas of finance, human resources, marketing. That's where our park rangers are, our safety, and our training and technology. Our parks division, we have division managers in each of those divisions. Eugene Coleman is our Parks Maintenance Division Manager. You can see some of the statistics about how much we maintain. These guys are unbelievably talented. So we maintain a lot of parkland. We maintain a lot of open space, but we also do medians and right-of-ways. So we share those responsibilities with public services throughout the city. Some of the major right-of-ways that we do are Wendover, we do Highway 68, we do MLK. So those are pretty big responsibilities. We also have, you won't know this probably, but we have a lot of smaller medians in our right-of-ways that we take care of throughout the city. You can see how many locations they are versus the acreage. There's a lot of them, and they're very, very small. They can be mulched areas, little grassed areas, but we contract a lot of those services out so that we can focus on really our mission and our open space and our parks and our athletic fields. We're involved with market preparation in the downtown area. Any athletic fields, that's us. We take care of that, all the maintenance and preparation for that. Mobile stage you've seen around, that's our guys that are out on the weekends bringing those around. The city has a facilities division, but internal to Parks and Recreation, we have our own facilities division, a group of 6 employees that work out of Parks Maintenance that manage all of our facilities and parks and infrastructure, and these guys do a great job. Recreation Division, our manager is Tyler Cole there. Our adaptive sports programs, Inclusive Recreation Aspire, used to be called Special Populations. That's our programs that serve individuals with disabilities, youth and adults. You can see our recreation centers fall under here as well as our athletics division and our senior center. And Tyler does a good job. A lot of our programming obviously comes out of the recreation division. Our last division is the Special Facilities Division. Colton Marble is our division manager there. So these are your bigger facilities, your typical revenue generating facilities, not really non-traditional, but as it relates to recreation, they are golf courses and marinas, Sea Lake Park, Washington Terrace Park, and everything around Ocala with the parks along the lake, Sailboat Point, Festival Park, North Overlook, and the Piedmont Environmental Center as well. Marinas, we're very fortunate to have 2 marinas. You can see what we do at each location there, at Ocala Marina and at High Point City Lake. They're kind of unique and amongst themselves, but we do offer similar amenities, similar programming. We'll talk a little bit about rowing. Rowing is really big at Ocala. We have some other things that our pontoon boat tours, for example, we do at the City Lake that we don't do at Ocala, but these marinas are well used. If you've been to them, if you're familiar with them, they get a lot of use. And again, something we're very fortunate to have here in the city and to have it for recreation as well. Golf courses, again, talked about Blair Park, which opened in 1932. Ocala opened in 1972. So you can see the rounds played throughout the course of the last 3 years. Blair Park is a lot of repeat customers, I should call it. We get more kind of regional play from Ocala, but you can see the rounds are pretty similar. They're going up a little bit. We had a downtime right before COVID. Golf and tennis are kind of up and down as far as playability. When people want to play, it's hard to predict. But our golf courses are in great shape. We have a great superintendent. I'd say he's probably one of the best superintendents in the state. And these courses get a lot of use throughout the course of the year, and I foresee these numbers continuing to go up. We do manage them. We don't contract out any golf courses or anything like that. We also manage the grill rooms at both locations as well, so those are city employees. Ocala Campground, 107 RV tent sites and 13 tents. Campground is something that's going way up. Our numbers, our revenues, our night visits have gone up. You can see how many nights stayed in FY23. At one point, that number about 3 or 4 years ago was around 14,000 nights. So now we're trending at around 20,000 nights a year, which is very high. A lot of that can be attributed to the baby boomer generation. A lot of more people retiring, a lot of people traveling, but we're getting a lot of use out of that campground. It's in a great location too. Furniture market, you can see we have a lot of visitors that come in for the furniture market. If there's a big special event in the area, you can bet there are a lot of people staying at the campground as well. The golf tournament in Greensboro in August always brings us a lot of residents to the campground as well. So our numbers are going up there. We have good infrastructure. It's beautiful along the lake, and people are more excited about camping. We do have a pool there. I'll talk about pools in a minute. We have the 2 at Washington Terrace and Sea Lake Park. We do have a pool there that's not manned, it's not guarded, and it's just for residents of the campground. Sports complex, we have 4 of them. You can see them there. You're probably familiar with them. High Point Athletic Complex, Johnson Street Disc Golf, Johnson Street Sports Complex, and the Ocala Tennis Complex. Both get a lot of use. Our track and field football stadium is open to the public for walking as well. I'll talk a little bit about that. Disc golf continues to grow at a big rate too. We have a lot of disc golfers that enjoy the 18-hole course there. Johnson Street Athletic Complex, we have a great relationship with Pony Baseball, who we work hand in hand with there. So that complex stays crowded. If you're ever out there on the weekend, you can certainly understand it. There's a lot of kids playing baseball and softball these days. Piedmont Environmental Center, about 6.5 miles of natural trails. Serves as an educational, basically educational forum for our citizens. We have, I would say, Dick Thomas, if you know Dick, he's a great environmental educator, teaches a lot of class there. We do great camps there. There's a big mapscape if you haven't had a chance to go visit that as well.
How many years has he been with us?
Let's see, Dick was with the Piedmont Environmental Center before the city took it over.
Yeah.
So he, I don't know how many years he was there, but Dick's been here, how long? He's been here pushing 20 years, I would say.
I think it's longer than that. Yeah, but he's been here a long time.
So it might have been right before the city, the Piedmont Environmental Center was a nonprofit before it became part of the city, so he was there with them before. Great tie-in with our greenways. The connection point from Deep River Road to Penny Road matches up there now, so that really increased our foot traffic through that area. That's basically where the High Point Greenway and the Bicentennial Greenway come together. And then, of course, now we have the connection into City Lake Park now from the Piedmont Environmental Center as well. Washington Terrace Park and Pool, at a community center, 2 meeting rooms and kitchen that we have there, gets a ton of use. Great pool out there. Tennis courts, sand volleyball courts, and our athletic fields as well. Top left-hand picture is, thanks to Eric and the Kiwanis group, that was 4 years ago, raised over $100,000 to put in an accessible playground. To replace 131. Did we shortchange this? I said 100,000 plus, didn't I? To replace an old playground unit that was there, and it is an awesome playground. It's really nice. Recreation centers, we have 5. Southside, Oakview, and Moorhead are your older centers. Deep River and Allen J were built about 15 years ago, but both serve a variety of programs, recreation activities, athletics. We do day camps there at 4 locations. We do summer day camps there as well. Both of them getting a ton of use throughout the course of the year. This shows you some of our programs that happen throughout the course of the year. These tie into our comprehensive master plan that I'll talk a little bit about as we look at athletics, cultural arts, fitness, instructional, and now focusing more on outdoor education as well. Special events, these have really taken off since COVID. I know we've noticed an increase in attendance. I think our community loves family-oriented events. So you'll see a ton of people at each one of these. It used to be Uncle Sam Jam was a big one, and we'd have a ton of people there, and we still do. But all those events now are recording some record numbers as far as attendance. Good family events, good atmospheres, and well received. We couldn't do what we do without volunteers and community partners. This is just a small list of some of those community partners. The volunteers do amazing work for us through a variety of programs, whether it's coaching an athletic team, being a buddy with our Aspire, our Miracle League, Adopt a Park programs through different corporations. We couldn't do it without volunteers. It's a beautiful reflection of the people here in High Point too, because again, you just don't see that everywhere. Some of our community partners and what they do, Unreal, Piedmont Trad Football Club and Pony Baseball are 2 of our big athletic youth athletic groups that we work hand in hand with, and they just do an amazing job of really the relationship that they have with us, but the programs and services they provide are top notch. I don't think in the 11 years I've been here, I've ever gotten a complaint on Pony Baseball or the Piedmont Trad Football Club, and that's great. They may get some complaints, but I've never heard much, but nothing but good things. Talk a little bit about our budget, and you can see where we were the last 3 fiscal years with our expenses, and you can see where we are with our revenues. We track our cost recovery to hopefully lessen the impact of the cost of the general fund throughout the course of the year. You can see where that number is, where it's been, 22, 24, 25%. We're doing really well, and this is a reflection of a lot of people in our parks. That's also a reflection of City Lake Park, increased amount of people we've seen in the park, and additional revenue that's come in through those programs. At one point, we were around 30%, so to be able to recover about 30% of what it costs for us to operate the department is important to us, obviously, to offset some of the costs associated with the many facilities that we run and how expensive things are becoming to run, and you see some of those numbers and how they've gone up over the years. We're trying to maintain that 30% as we move forward. So comprehensive master plan, we completed this in 2018. So this goes through and basically puts together a 10-year action plan and some implementation plans and strategies, how we can move forward. It focused on these 5 areas: parkland, facilities, programming, operations and maintenance, and finance. It's pretty thick. I can give it to you to read, but we've broken it down into what we call a strategic plan, and that has an action and implementation plan. And we're about ready to report back on a lot of those items in that plan, in which we've completed in the 6 years that plan's been in place. It's typically 10 years. It needs to be updated at some point moving forward, but at least it gives us a good template on where we want to go moving forward. Very heavily based in community input, so a lot of that plan, when we did it, is very intense in really polling our citizens and what they'd like to see in our department in the next 10 years. Festival Park in the North Overlook, I know you guys are pretty familiar with those, what we have in those particular areas. Obviously, Festival Park has 4 big events over the course of the year: the Coltrane Festival over Labor Day weekend, Uncle Sam Jam on the 4th of July. We have 2 very good-sized rowing regattas, one in spring, one in the fall, and then we have some private events throughout the course of the year. As you guys know, we just completed the Festival Park Master Plan. That plan is in place to show some improvements to allow for some connectivity between North Overlook and Festival Park. The 2 park areas includes crossing the dam, so we can provide some connectivity, additional restrooms, areas for some temporary stages for different events. So you guys, we appreciate your support on this plan. We had great participation again from the public when we went and took this plan to them and garnered some great input. Greenways and Trails, this will tell you a little bit about what we have for basically 3 systems now. They're called different things, but they're all kind of interconnecting. Obviously, it's a greenway. With our greenway system, Bicentennial Greenway. The Bicentennial Greenway is most of it is managed by Guilford County Parks and Recreation. It picks up just north of the PEC. It goes all the way to Gallimore Dairy Road before it terminates. Greensboro says it connects there, just so y'all know. It does not. Yeah, that's a Greensboro thing. It's not us. We did it. But they always say it connects there, and I never know whether to tell us. Say no, it doesn't. The Bicentennial and the High Point Greenway. Bicentennial's got some age on it. It's got some issues as far as operations and maintenance there. Southwest Heritage Greenway. Of course, you know a little bit about that. That part of the plan, the Southwest plan, is included verbatim in our High Point master plan for greenways that I'll talk about in a little bit. We wanted to point this out because this is very important. I think you see it now, people, some things never change. People want to walk, they want to run, they want to get out on their bike. So the ability to get out, anytime we do a survey, walkability, getting out, trails, that's always going to be near the top of the list, and we're seeing that now. So we have some other options of some loops where you can go. I talked about the High Point Athletic Complex and the track facility there, Washington Terrace at Allen J. We have a small walking path as well. So this is very important, and we're seeing this not only here in High Point, you're seeing that statewide, nationally too. Really, that the connectivity is part of it too, but people still just want to get out, walk, run, ride their bikes. Again, I talked about special events and family-oriented activities. That can be a family-oriented activity as well. So people are still interested in that. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that too. People started getting out a little bit more. Greenway Master Plan, we completed this in 2021. So this identifies greenway paths throughout the city that are already in place, and it talks about paths we'd like to see in place in the near future, and probably in the far future too. But it talks about, really, phase 1 talks about this spine, kind of goes through the city. So this is kind of that Southwest Greenway. The phase 1, moving into the High Point Greenway and onto the Bicentennial Greenway. And phase 2 starts talking about how we connect. You see a little bit of the imprint of the yellow there, how we make a loop around there and start making those connections. And it provides kind of some ideas, some plans that are a little bit easier, lower hanging fruit, versus plans that are a little bit further down the road where we need to acquire land or we have other issues as far as constructability. But phase 3 talks about building out the system and how we do that. So if you're not familiar with that plan, this one's easy to read. It's got some good maps in there too, and it'll show you what we had approved in 2021. High Point City Lake Park, we'll talk a little bit about this. it's come a long way. If you're familiar with the park, I know a lot of you are, you know some of the amenities that we have in place. We completed a master plan in 2019. Of course, this was part of one of two projects on the 2019 bond project for Parks and Recreation, the other one being the Senior Center, our Center for Active Adults. We began planning this and went through the design phase during the pandemic because there was a lot of questions of how to administer and manage pools at the time. So we wanted to go ahead and get it done. We didn't know whether we needed to open or not. I don't think anybody knew what the best route was there. We began construction in April of 2021. In 2022, we received a grant from the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund for $500,000. So we added in the bridge and greenway that you see that goes across City Lake to connect to the PDC in our existing greenway. And then we opened it, I think we did ribbon cutting in November of 22, but we officially opened it, if you guys remember, in January of 23. And then this past summer was our first summer with the pool open in May of 23. We just opened a new playground. There we replaced the existing playground unit, and we have one more aspect of that project. We're replacing a pontoon boat that was a 1973 model, so we're replacing that one. It's seen better years. We're replacing that and have that in place this spring. So those of you who weren't here, we talked about the age of our department in City Lake being one of the oldest parks areas, and a little bit about our infrastructure. I'm going to show you some ugly pictures. This is old City Lake Park. This was, see how bad that looks? These are some of the pictures of City Lake before we went in and made some improvements. I feel like there you're entering a jail, you know, but this is where you're entering a pool, you know, so it doesn't look that inviting. That's the old pool right there in the back of the building. Some of the mechanical issues that we went through. There was an old lifeguard hut in place. This at one point was an old gymnasium, obviously. It served many purposes. We developed this plan, and obviously it was part of our 2019 bond package, as I said, and you guys know. And here are some of the end results of what City Lake looks like now. This is a history wall inside the building too as well that talks about a lot of the history that we spoke about earlier. We turned the gym into a meeting and event space that has been well received and well used. The pool has 4 sections. It's in the same footprint as what the old pool was, but now we have a splash pad, 50-meter pool, 0-depth entry pool, and a lazy river, along with the addition of a slide at City Lake Park. So it's got great views. Here's a picture of the bridge that we have in place from land that connects to the greenway that I spoke about earlier. Our new playground is in place. Real interesting stat. I know I'm running long. But from May to August in the summer of 2019 at City Lake Park, we had 101,000 visitors. From May to August of last year, we had 265,000. And we had 50,000 people come through the pool last summer. 50,000 people, and you can see what it did in our revenue as well. Talk a little bit about the Senior Center. You guys are familiar with that. Where we are now at Oak Hollow Mall, where we are in the planning process. And we're just, as we just hired, you guys approved the contract for CPO out of Greensboro, so we're starting the design phase now. These are the parcels. The building's probably going to be somewhere in this area, just so you know. There's Oakview Recreation Center, but those are the 5 parcels the city owns in that particular area. Westchester Park, you may know not, this was 62 acres of undeveloped parkland that sits off Burton, Coventry, behind Westchester, basically behind the police headquarters. The city owns this property, bought a lot of it 11 years ago, 12 years ago. Some of the most beautiful property you will see. We don't have any plans for it right now, it's undeveloped. But again, it is close to 63 acres there off Westchester. We identified that need for a park in that section of town. We did a master plan way back when, August 6th of 2013, so that needs to be updated. But that shows at the time what we would use this park for. It's more of a passive area with the rolling hills, the topography. You wouldn't be able to do anything lit really. Need more trails, mountain bike trails, walking trails. At that point, we needed a dog park, so you could see a good-sized dog park there. An additional disc golf was on the original plan. This plan needs to be updated once we decide we need to move forward or how we should move forward with Westchester Park. City also owns some undeveloped land off Dillon Road Park. This is congruent to land managed by Public Services, where they have a pump station off Dillon Road, and it's close to 35 acres there. You can see where that's located off the Jamestown Parkway, kind of out near City Lake Park. This is a way to connect with us. If you need to find it, I think we do a pretty good job of getting the word out. And we also have an app. If you go to the Piedmont Discovery app, we're working with some of our neighboring communities to let you go on this particular app, Piedmont Discovery app, and you can find a park, trail, facility, whatever you need in this particular area. All right. I know I need to hustle, so.
Lee, thank you so much. Any questions from council or any observations?
Fantastic job. I think the investment from the bond in 2019 is going to be realized. I mean, you look at the increase in patronage of City Lake Park, look at the revenue return. I think it's just a fantastic investment.
Yeah, that sounds great. We appreciate y'all's support on that. It's a great project. Still a great project.
I've always found the Parks and Rec staff to be very helpful.
Oh, good.
Events I've been involved with all the years, so.
We'll try to keep that up.
Yeah. You know, Lee, I think to all the points everyone said here, it's been incredible work by Parks and Rec. And certainly seeing City Lake Park generate revenue like that shows that there's an ROI to it in terms of activity, foot traffic. So very glad to see that. I'll tell you, if there's been some persistent things I still get emails and phone calls about, as well as people yelling at stoplights, hey, make sure you do such Y and Z. The speed bumps, that always comes up. As of late, it's been these semi-trailers and parked in different places. You know what the third thing is, right?
Pickleball.
I
just had that Saturday.
I was at the soccer game yesterday, and someone said, man, this soccer game is great, but you know what's better? Pickleball. And I said, wow, I didn't see that coming. I did not see that coming. Where do you think we are in terms of in part of it, people ask, is there not a way to convert some of our existing tennis courts that may be underutilized? And I know your team is kind of talking about that a little bit.
So let me answer that first, because we get a lot of that. So people will ride by a certain tennis court, and you'll see that nobody's on the tennis court and think that it's never used. May or may not be right now. But pickleball, the infrastructure needed for pickleball is a lot more than tennis. So if you think about pickleball, smaller courts, typically they're playing doubles, so you have more people on the court. So like at Armstrong Park, where we have 4 outdoor courts, we have parking, we have restrooms. It's not the best setup, but we have an infrastructure in place. We have lighting. It's pretty simple. The other factor with that, so the infrastructure is one thing. Second part is pickleball is loud. Has anybody here played pickleball and been there? It's very loud. I'm surprised there's the pickleball courts are right behind these houses near Armstrong, and I'm surprised I've never heard from them. I guess they might be pickleball players. So there's a lot to consider. Somebody asked me the other day if you know where Mohawk is, why that couldn't be pickleball courts. Well, one, you don't have the parking. It's never been used for that before. You don't have any infrastructure. There's not a lot of accessibility to them. You're going to have, if you have 8 courts going, you'll probably have 30 cars. You know, in these parking lots, we have these small neighborhood parks where we have tennis courts. You have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parking spots. So then you start getting people on roads. There's no restroom facilities for these facilities or for pickleball. So there's so many more people that are playing pickleball. It just needs more. It can't be 2 tennis courts in a neighborhood park, or you're going to have problems that we never imagined having in those particular areas. So you need more space. You need more space. You need. It might be something we could do on the campus where the new senior center is going to go, because you need parking, you need restroom facilities. Oftentimes you need lighting, and you just have to take into consideration your neighbors when you're starting to build those courts.
Yeah, I'll say after hearing it so much, it feels like there's been demand for it. There was a
Demand.
It's the highest, we get it too, and there's a big need for it. There's a big need to it. I mean, we're to the point now we're going to have to resurface. We got to put a new surface on the courts at Armstrong. If you're ever out and about, go by Armstrong. There's people playing, there's usually 10 or 12 waiting.
Yeah.
So what about some of our areas they're kind of big that we already have, like the Southside Rec Center or well, I guess OP rec centers would be the senior center, but what about something that's kind of already in existence that just doesn't have a pickleball
So
court?
we contracted with CPL, the same group that's doing our design work, to look at Blair Park Golf Course, because we have 3 tennis courts there that never get used. Those are our
Okay.
least used tennis courts. We also have the need for additional parking there as well. So we wanted to look at parking, because again, what I just said prior, if you bring more people in there, we already have a parking issue at the golf course, and if we want to do some pickleball courts there, then that's going to require even more parking. So, but we do have existing room there that were tennis courts at one time, and I'm pretty sure those are LWCF monies tied into those, what would be tennis courts. You can convert them to pickleball courts, and it wouldn't be that big of an issue. But courts like that, it's just, but you're on the right track, because you just need more space. But it depends on use too. The tennis courts at Oakview Recreation Center are our most highly used tennis courts outside of Ocala. So it just depends on, we have some at Allen J where the use isn't as high. But you need somewhere where you have a little bit more space, where you have accommodations, where you have.
More head racks?
Yeah,
All
Lee, I know
those.
where,
So
I
they've
know
got
we're
good
tight on.
parking and lots of land.
Yeah, Lee, I know we're tight on time. I just know I'd be remiss if I didn't say cricket fields, because that comes up a lot too.
Yeah.
And I know you can't explain it right now in our time. I want to respect the time today and go ahead and get us out of here. Lee, thank you so much. We appreciate
Thank
you.
y'all, thank y'all.
Team, we've got 5 minutes until regular meeting. Does anyone need more time than that? Everyone feel good? Okay. Lee, thank you so much. Do we need a motion to adjourn a briefing? It's just a. All right. We are adjourned the manager's briefing, and we'll start at 5:30 in the regular meeting. Thank you.
Lee.